Yesterday, we had spoken about the difference between the first paragraph of the Shema and the second paragraph. The Gemara explains that the first paragraph is referred to as Kabbalos Omal Shamayim, accept the yoke of heaven. The second paragraph is Kabbalos Ol Mitzvos. You accept the yoke, the obligation to perform all the mitzvos themselves. It's interesting, each mitzvah has another value on a spiritual level. It offers another level of infusion into our soul. They give us a certain degree of spirituality to have relevance to eternity. But the Mishnah tells us Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Torah itself is the equivalent of all the mitzvahs combined. And as I always quote the Vilna Gaon, that one word of Torah is the equivalent of all 613 mitzvahs. That's its innate spiritual value. Now the question is why? Why does the Torah have that? So you'd say, because the Torah is really the basis for everything. As the Navi says, if my covenant wouldn't be in place day and night, all the extent, the protocols of heaven and earth would not be put in place. So based on the Zohar, and Rav Chaim Volozhiner mentions this in his work Nefesh HaChaim, that if there should be one moment that there is any lapse of Torah in the world will revert back to pre-existence. So what is the underpinning of all existence? What fuels existence? What fuels existence is the study of Torah. The mitzvahs don't. The mitzvahs are details. That's actualization of certain realities, creating certain energies, which have directly with our neshama, with our soul. But what is the all-encompassing, which the whole world is dependent on this? That's the study of Torah. I'd said not long ago, a moshel, an allegory, which the Chofetz Chaim presents about the king with the steamboat, that the king wanted a replica of his palace built on top of a steamboat. And it should be an exact replica. And when he sits in his palace on the water and the steamboat starts moving and the paddles start turning, he will just skim over the water, skim over the ocean. That's what he wanted. And when it's ready for him to enter into, he comes to the dock and they say to the king, "Your Highness, it's ready for you to see." Walks in, it's breathtaking. He's never seen anything like it. An identical replica of his palace on a smaller model. And they give him a test ride, and it begins. He sees the paddles moving. It skims and glides just over the water, like over a piece of glass. He's amazed. He says to the captain, "Could you explain to me how exactly this works?" He starts explaining to him that the turbines and the bow of the ship and their ovens and there's furnaces, and they put the coal in the furnace, there's water, generates steam, and the steam causes the turbines to turn, and that's how the boat moves. He said, "I'd like to see it myself. I'd like to see it." So he says, the king pleads with him. He says, "It's not appropriate for the king to go down there. It's not clean enough. It's something which you may be upset with. It's better you shouldn't go." He says, "No, I want to see it." Goes down, he sees the furnaces, he sees the men shoveling coal into the furnaces, and there's so much coal dust, the walls are covered with inches of coal dust, the floors are covered with coal dust. The white men shoveling the coal, they look black because the coal dust is ingrained in every pore of their skin. And the king sees this, he becomes enraged, becomes livid. He says, "My palace, such a level of uncleanliness, not acceptable. I want you immediately to break out the walls of the boat." So the captain pleads with him. You break out the walls, the ship goes down. Doesn't make a difference. I will not tolerate this level of squalor, uncleanliness. As much as they plead with him, he doesn't listen. They follow the order. They break out the walls of the boat sinks. It's the end. The palace, the people, they all perished because the king insisted it's something not acceptable. Now, the men in the bows of the ship, they looked a little paltry. They looked a little malnourished because they worked literally at a level of heat which was barely survivable. Plus, they did physical labor, manual labor, shoveling the coal into the furnaces. They weren't a specimen of good health, that's for sure. So the Chofetz Chaim writes, you go to a Beis Medrash, and you see people, as Shlomo says in Mishlei, Tzadik ochel soved nafsho. But Tzadik, when he eats, he only eats to sate his soul. He doesn't live to eat, he eats to live. And to what degree? Only what's necessity. Beyond that, he doesn't eat. Tzadik ochel, the Tzadik eats to sustain his soul. So you realize if you come and you see a person studying 18 hours a day, 19 hours a day, he's not a specimen of robust health because he only eats enough to get by. He weans himself from the material. A wealthy man comes into the study hall and he sees this person studying, fully engrossed in the learning, and he looks like he's bordering on a skeleton, or somebody who's definitely nothing to write home about. And that because of this, he looks at him with a certain condescending attitude. Like they used to say, he looked at him from the tip of his nose downward. What's the value of this person? The Mishnah tells us in Sanhedrin that if a person says, "Ma'ya hani lo rabbanan," these rabbis, they sit and learn all day. What do we need them for? You say that, that person has no share in the world to come. Because these people are the foundation for existence. And you say they're a bunch of parasites. What do we need them for? What's their value? They're involved in something which is archaic, outdated, defunct. It's not relevant any longer. The person who makes that kind of comment, he has no share in the world to come. Because he is the breadwinner. He's the hand that feeds you. And you're saying, what do we need him for? This is based on the pasuk, if not my comment being in effect day and night, the world would not continue. It would revert back to pre-creation. So we speak about Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. The Torah is the covenant. That's the study of Torah. That keeps everything afloat and keeps things soaring. That's the so-called, what we call the booster rockets that propels the ship out of the stratosphere of physicality. That's what Torah is. Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Therefore, Torah is the ultimate. Okay? But the Gemara in Kedushin tells us something much more specific, something with greater relevance. Godol HaTalmud. Because the Torah says, the Gemara quotes a verse, and the Rambam quotes the same verse in the laws of Talmud Torah. It says, Ushmarte vasisem. When you retain the Torah, you will do them. So here we learn, Godla Talmud Shatal Mevigle Maseh. Torah is the ultimate because it allows you to actualize those studies. If you don't study, you do, you don't do. But if you study the Torah, especially that specific mitzvah or the negative commandment, it infuses you with a level of spirit that you have a clarity and you're able to relate to it, and you see and understand why it's not appropriate, and you don't transgress. And the mitzvah, you're motivated to do the mitzvah. There's something innate in Torah which gives you that energy to overcome that inertia, to give you that spirit and that power to actualize the mitzvah and complete it. That's Godla Talmud. Great is Talmud because it brings Lidei Maseh. It brings to actualization. It allows you to bring it to fruition. That's why Torah is so important. So it seems from the Rambam, when we say Talmud Torah Keneged Kul, when we say Talmud is great, it brings to actualization. It's not only you study laws of tefillin. You study tefillin, it creates an energy. You'll be drawn to do the mitzvah of tefillin. But it seems to be, if you study Torah, even if you're studying only tefillin, it opens a whole new area of interest and dynamic of energy to all spirituality. Even though you're studying tefillin or tzitzis, or whatever this particular area may be, it's maybe the maseh, because once you're already touched with that level of energy, which is the all-encompassing energy, you're drawn towards tefillin and the tzitzis and the Shabbos and the kashrus, whatever it may be. So why is Torah so vital? Because it produces an energy. That energy is the all-encompassing energy which touches upon every mitzvah in the Torah. Although when we don't gravitate towards spirituality, we're not inclined for spirituality, but nevertheless, if we do engage in Torah, it gives us a capacity to have a sense of its value, and therefore we cover the full gamut of the positive and negative commandments. That's the understanding. This is the Shinantum Levanecho. Teach your children, but only after you've mastered it. There's no question they'll ask that you can't respond to. It should be sharp in your mouths, sharp. Without any hesitation, you're able to respond. That's the level of clarity. It's like you own the subject matter. Besides, what are people impressed with? Mediocrity. You teach, somebody asks a question, I got to think about it. I got to research it. But if you present it at an advanced level with a cogency, with a clarity, with a level of proprietorship that you own that material, and you can explain it and bring it to a simple level, people are touched by that. They're impressed with it. Otherwise, if it comes across paltry or not that level of insight or newness or intellectualism, people say, not impressed. Person gives a shear, a Torah shear, and the listener says, I'm not impressed. It's a problem. There's certain people you can't change their behavior. But if you take a poll and the average person says, I'm not impressed, it's a problem. The problem is either the subject matter wasn't the right subject matter to teach, or maybe your preparation wasn't sufficient. Your delivery wasn't that good. You're not a good representative. It could be they don't have a merit. There are multiple reasons, and a little bit of each of them may have application. So Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam is, since the Torah itself is the all-encompassing of everything, when you study Torah, it creates a sense, a feeling, a sensitivity to a spirituality, a positive sense to a spirituality, and therefore brings you overcome all the inertia of every part of your involvement in Judaism to do it with alacrity because you have a sense of its value. That's why Talmud Torah is Keneged Kulam. In addition, because as I said, when you study, you become appreciative for everything in the spiritual realm, although we only process it within the physical. The Gemara tells us that if you want to come upon the truth of Torah, you have to toil. It has nothing to do. It's not dependent solely on your IQ, your intellect. It's more than that. One needs a special siyata d'shmaya. You need a divine intervention, assistance to bring you to that level of clarity. And the Gemara tells us, Motzoso, you got to Motzoso Tamim. If you toiled in Torah and you came upon its truth, you believe that person. If you say, I've toiled, I did not come upon the truth, don't believe that person. If you say, I didn't toil, I came upon its truth, you don't believe that person. Because the only way you come upon its truth is only if you toil sufficiently. You toil sufficiently, you merit that siyata d'shmaya, that divine assistance to come upon its truth. That's the reality. We find that Moshe Rabbeinu, he ascended to heaven 40 days and 40 nights to receive the Torah. What went on during this 40-day period, day and night? So the Midrash tells us every day God taught Moshe Rabbeinu the Torah in entirety. Couldn't have a better teacher than Moshe, God himself. Moshe Rabbeinu is a phenomenal student. But yet, at the end of the day, he forgot everything he was taught. Like it was never taught. God repeats this exercise a second time. The whole Torah's entirety in one day. Moshe hears it, he's impressed, forgets. In various scenarios, this repeats itself 40 times. For every day he was in heaven, by the end of the day, he studied the whole Torah in its entirety. At the end of the day, he forgot it. So he had to be retaught. It repeated itself 40 times. Why did God have to review it so many times? What was the lesson? If God wanted him to retain it the first time, he would have retained it. But he had to go through the cycle of 40, only after the 40th time was he able to retain it. Well, God is teaching us that within the memory bank of a human being, within the brain, that part of the brain is reserved for retention of physical data. Spiritual data, it's not related to the retention part of the brain. It's not that special divine intervention that allows you to hold on to it with its clarity, with its cogency, with its feeling. And that was the lesson taught to Moshe Rabbeinu. That although the Torah itself, it manifests itself and its applications within the physical, but in terms of its innate value is spiritual. Therefore, the mind is not the faculty for the Torah itself. So Moshe only learned that lesson. After being taught the Torah 40 times and forgetting it each time, had it to be retaught, and only after 40th time was he able to retain it. That teaches Moshe volumes of the innateness of Torah that has no relevance to physicality. I had mentioned just a few moments ago, if you want to come upon truth of Torah, you have to toil. Without toiling, it doesn't happen. Now, what's toiling? You have to review. You have to focus. And if it's when you review, you're just not saying words. Without the focus, it doesn't have much value. You review it, you focus, you try to understand at a certain level. But each time you understand, you review, if you review properly, you're going to come onto new insights, things that you didn't notice the first time. And when you review the 20th time, you could come upon certain things because now everything is built on what you studied before, and you may come upon other things again. All this is what is called siyata d'shmaya. You read a book, you read it 1,000 times, it's the same book, same information. When it comes to the study of Torah, continuously, you're touched in a way where you notice something which you didn't notice until you noticed it. What is it all about? The answer is that anything in the spiritual realm, as it says in Pirkei Avos, hafach bo tekula bo. As much as you turn it and you move it, everything's contained there. But you have to just keep going back for more. And that's going against the grain. If you know it again, what's the point? No. Because if you accept and embrace the words of Chazal, which is part of our Masorah, the only way you come upon these new horizons with Torah, it's only the continuously reviewing and new application. And therefore, it's alluded in the first four words of the second paragraph of Shema. And Rashi and Chumash brings this interpretation from Chazal on the second paragraph. Voyo im shamoah. And if you will listen, what's tishmu? If you will listen, you will listen. Totally redundant. Voyo im shamoah tishmu. So the Gemara tells us, im shamoah b'yishonim tishmu b'chadoshim. If you grasp what was previously studied, you're going to come upon new insights in that same text. I can tell you myself, I learned the Parsha, I learned the Rambam, I learned the Gemara. Every time I read the Parsha, I notice new things in the Parsha, which I never noticed before, and even if I did notice, the level of how profound it is and how broad it is, it's only after reviewing it and focusing over and over again. You review the Gemara, same thing. The Gemara, you study it to prepare initially, you touched a certain way. After you review it, to retain it, if you focused again, you touched again. And continuously, you see new things. That's im shamoah b'yishonim tishma b'chadoshim. If you retain the old and you review the old, it'll give you a greater capacity for the new Torah that you never studied before. That's why Yosh im Shema Tishmu. If Tishma b'Yoshan, Tishmu b'Chodosh. It's interesting. Moshe Rabbeinu, when he saw the golden calf, he broke the tablets. He went up for 40 days and 40 nights to supplicate Hashem for forgiveness. Hashem says, I forgive them. V'solachti. They're forgiven. He goes up another 40 days and nights for the second set of tablets. And he studies the Torah over again, 40 days and 40 nights. He studied it the first time, 40 days and 40 nights. Maybe he had to stay there to receive a new set of tablets. But Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't say that. He says, when I was heaven the second time, it was like the first time. I studied day and night. I did not eat bread. I did not drink water. What's the point? If 40 days and 40 nights is sufficient, was the first time Moshe retained it. So if he retained it, what's, again, this repetition, another 40 days and 40 nights? How do we understand it? Seems to be a little difficult. So the way I understood it, the way I understand it is, the second set of tablets were not at the same level as the first set of tablets. The first set of tablets were created by God and etched by God. The second tablets, the tablets were formed by Moshe Rabbeinu, and he brought those tablets made of sapphire, he brought them up, and God engraved them. Engraved the tablets with 10 commandments. The first was all God. Second tablets was man's initiative had to do with those tablets. The level of Torah, because the Jews sinned with the golden calf, their capacity to come upon all the original spiritual horizons, they forfeited that. They no longer have it. So they, as a result of the Torah, which is given the second time, the second set of tablets, it's at a much more deficient level. Because again, it has to accommodate their spirituality. But since they permanently damaged their spirituality due to the golden calf, we have to refit the Torah. The Torah now takes on a different level of guise to be able to impact on their souls. It came beyond the original level. The original level was beyond mega energy. It's still mega energy, but it's something which conforms to their limited level of spirituality, which before the sin of the golden calf, they had an unlimited level of spirituality. So therefore, we had to study those laws over again, the Torah's entirety over again, to be able to communicate 40 years worth of Torah knowledge to those Jews who are meant to be part of the future, the ones who survived. Okay? If you review the old, you're going to merit the divine assistance to be able to come upon the new. And the takeaway is going to be a correct takeaway. Now, sometimes people, they say a shir, and they said, Rabbi, see, we can learn from here that. I said, what are you talking about? What does that happen? We're not even talking about that. But just you're extrapolating. From where are you coming from? Has no relevance to the whole discussion. So the person tells me what he understands, and of course, he misunderstands. So, you build something on a false premise, the whole structure is not going to survive. It has to be correct, authentic, and made according to specification. If not, it's going to fall. If you study the Torah properly and you retain it, the old Torah, im shamoa tishmu, if you heard it in the past and you comprehended in the past and you retained the past, tishmu, you're going to come upon new understandings because it builds on itself. As you advance, the intensity of the energy increases. Therefore, even though initially it was something less, the less could bring you to more. And so I am Shema Tishmu. El mitzvosai, to my mitzvos. This is very important. People give charity. You say, why do you give charity? Of course, it's the right thing to do. Why? Of course, if you're a moral, ethical person and you're a beneficiary of society, you always have to give back. You're supposed to give back. It's the right thing to do. You take from society, you give back to society. I was successful. I was fortunate. I want to help those who are less fortunate. But that's giving back. You ask a Jew, why do you give charity? Why do you give tzedakah? He says, because I want to be a giving person. That's what he says. But factually, that's not the reason why you give charity. You give charity because God says you have to give charity. You have to be involved in supporting the poor, the needy. It's not because it's ethical, moral, ethical, or it's a conscious issue. Well, el mitzvosai. El mitzvos asher anochi mitzaves chamayom. If you heed and review the mitzvahs which I am commanding you today, but it's mitzvosai. It's my mitzvahs. It's not, you can pick it off a shelf. This shelf is God's shelf. You're taking it out of the Torah itself. Then we talk about, if you study the Torah as mitzvosai, as his commandments, and it's his wisdom, lavos Hashem Elokechem, to love God, ulavdo, and to serve him, with all your hearts and all your lives, even to give you your life. That's how he imbued and committed you are to the Torah which you have. This point of mitzvos is very important. I always say, you say to a person, why don't you steal? It's unethical. It's the wrong thing. So you say, why? Because if you do that, you're a subhuman being. Why are you a subhuman being? Because society dictates it's unacceptable. We as Jews, that's not what society dictates. I mean, it reinforces what we do. The reason why we do is God said you're not permitted to steal. You're not permitted to damage. Whatever God says you're not permitted, that's God's wisdom, which dictates that mode of behavior. So when you want to merit the special divine assistance, it has to be mitzvosai. When you review it, you're reviewing my mitzvos. Who's the author of the script? God's the author of the script. And if you do that, you're going to merit to come upon other insights which are truth, because I'm endowing you with that additional gift for being so humble and saying it's not yours. We're going to stop here.